Hi everyone, welcome back to ScholarRaasta with Ahmar. In today's episode, we have a very special guest, Professor Kamoun from the Sainsbury Laboratory, UK. He is one of the world leading plant scientists, and today he is sharing simple and honest advice to the student how to connect with the professor when you are writing for the first time, and how you can be like you can write a strong research proposal. And we will also take his advice how to write a scientific paper and read the scientific article. So, thank you, Professor, again for you giving us a time to my audience, especially. So, we are very getting like knowledge from different professors around the world, and one of them is you. So, without wasting any time, I would like to start just from you a little bit introduction because now you are a world leading scientist, so you just can be a little bit about tell us about your journey when you start like a career, be a plant scientist or wanna go into the academic journey. So it will be helpful for us.
First of all, thank you, Sonny, for having me. I'm truly honored to talk to you and your community, and I hope this session can be inspiring to many of you. I'm Tunisian. I grew up in Tunisia, and I left there after high school. I went to Paris for my undergraduate. Then I went to the US to University of California, Davis for a PhD, and I kept traveling. So then I moved to the Netherlands for a postdoc. Then I moved back to the US to start my own lab, and here I am now in the UK in the Sainsbury lab in Norwich, UK. So I've been a bit of how do you call it, a knowledge nomad, if you like, or something like that. I've been nomadic. My mother tells me you must have nomadic genes because you keep moving all the time. So maybe that's that's what I inherited. But yeah, it's a fascinating journey, obviously, and I mean, what I learned to appreciate more than anything is the importance of different cultures and how they all have something to bring to the table. I learned every place I lived in, I learned something from it and its people, and hopefully I can combine all of these into something positive. So pleasure to talk to you and your colleagues.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we can start about the part one, like the student when we are writing email. So how professor think when they receive email from a student? Sometime I know you professor are receiving more than like 50 emails per week, sometime more than that. So how what the catchy title like gain your attention for the student emails, or sometime you just ignore like this email is like a generic email or something like that.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and yeah, it's a difficult question to answer, to be honest. And I think also I start with a disclaimer is that what I would say may not apply to all the other PIs because I have a particular way of identifying and selecting talent because that's really what this is about. And I think not all my colleagues may think the same way or operate in the same way. So, as kind of a warning, this what I would say now may not apply for everyone. So, I mean, the main angle there is more than anything is to show maturity. So I think maturity is in it's not like just about the technical skills you have or the grades you have or the studies you did. It's kind of an overall understanding of the scientific enterprise. So, for example, for instance, I'm a very strong advocate of open science. So if somebody sends me generic email and they have no idea of what I've been doing and advocating beyond my even my own research, then I would not be very impressed. I would assume this person is not really aware of what's going on in the community and haven't really done the research about my lab and even my own aspirations, which are, I think, there in the internet for everyone to read about. So I would not connect with that person. It will, if somebody's sending me an email saying simply, I have this degree and I have these skills, I can extract DNA or do some plasmid cloning or something like that. That's not gonna bring them to the forefront of my interests, right? So I think maturity is basically appreciating that the scientific enterprise is a lot more than just doing research and publishing papers. We are looking actually for people who are bigger than that, who can contribute more than that. We have people here who were selected because they are artists,
Mm-hmm.
believe it or not. in addition to being biologists and scientists. We have people who are selected here because they have amazing background in activism. I have a postdoc right now who was basically one of the pioneers of developing Our Ladies chapter in Tunis, and she was so engaged with that, and she did a lot of the sort of things that you're doing, actually, Sunny.
Okay.
So that's the type of things you really want to mention in an email to show that you're more than just a technical person. We're not looking for technicians, and to be honest, these days, a lot of things, a lot of services can be purchased, and it's not that difficult to actually find people who have technical skills. What's difficult is to find people who have passion, who have ambition, who really think about their contribution to society as much more than just doing some experiments in the lab, that are willing to really do a lot more than that. So if you can have this kind of passion and this kind of broader engagement shine through your email, you will certainly catch my attention.
Okay. Okay, thank you for your prospectus of view. What do you think the CV should be in length, like 4 5 pages, or CV should be like very concise or short in 1 or 2 pages? How you get the intention about the CVs?
I mean, this is really a very sort of technical, almost bureaucratic detail, I would say. I mean, I would not make it too long, but I
Mm-hmm.
would again, I think 2 pages should be sufficient to get a sense of what the candidate is about, what their background is, etc. But I think really showing more than the classical sort of section you see in a CV is really important. And again, I think we're looking for more than just the classical academic skills. Again, like for example, someone like yourself should definitely have links to your podcast. That would give me a really good idea about who you are and how you're thinking and so on, right? So think more broadly than sort of the classical maybe idea that people have of what a student or postdoc should be about. We look for leaders. We look for future leaders. So future leaders take initiatives. They don't just sit back and just do research and that's it. They do more than that.
Yeah, but in this like your talk, I would say like some students, we will go down like a master or PhD student, especially from our country like Pakistan, who don't have like much interaction or much facilities to do some research or to participate in some conferences or like have a social gathering to boost our confidence. So what do you suggest to that student how they can like nowadays I think like political things always also happen, and they don't have much confidence to express yourselves in social media or in other things. So, what you can suggest to them?
I mean, it's a very good point you raise. All I can say really is please be confident in yourself. If you're not confident in yourself, then, nobody's really gonna see your skills and what you have to offer shine through, right? So please really be proud of yourself. You're from Pakistan, you're from a country with a very deep ancient culture. You really have no reason. You have, produced amazing scientists. You have no reason not to feel confident. The sky is the limit. Now, the second thing is I know right now in the world, there's a lot of actually kind of dismay and unhappiness and protest by Gen Z, Gen Z. I think we've seeing that all the time. So this is basically the generation of most of the people who are listening to us today, probably. Um, it's an interesting, I mean, you're in an interesting conjecture, aren't you? Because on one hand, you have something that is unique that my generation and even the earlier generation didn't have, which is access to everything through the internet. You can learn anything right now. So
Yeah,
if you want to boost your confidence, please go and do a lot of self-learning. We are looking for self-learners too. So if you show me that you learn things on your own, independently of your curriculum,
yeah,
so no matter where you are in the world, you really have no reason not to, for example, learn basics of bioinformatics. All the courses are out there on the internet. There's a lot of stuff out there. And we have people like that who are joined us who have actually learned a lot on their own during their undergraduate studies and so on. They didn't really need a teacher to help them. You have access now to these AI tools. So they also can be fantastic guides for helping you to learn. So again, like initiative, self-learning, showing that you're actually taking advantage of the opportunities you have that actually previous generation haven't had the opportunity to. The days of having a teacher holding your hand and taking you through a curriculum are over. You have to be able to figure it out on your own. And this is really what will allow you to be successful in the future, in an AI kind of dominated future, because a lot of those kind of basic technical skills, the things that actually we learn at the university and in school, these days, that's very, how to say, that's very well documented and that's very coded, it's all coded knowledge. All of
Yeah.
that can be now produced by AI. I'm
Yeah.
sorry to say, but the role of even a teacher these days or a professor is not what it used to be. So what I want to see really is that kind of uh, awareness of all these opportunities and the capacity to capture them. Social media, I mean, the fact that we are talking today and we have connected, through social media, I'm sure, the reason we are connected
Yeah.
is you
Yeah.
have came across my profile through the internet or through social media somehow, and here we are talking to each other, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I think really show initiative again and do something. Don't be there passive. Just be entrepreneurial. Do something. Do a
Yeah.
podcast.
Thank you very much. From this answer, I would like to ask another question. Like, especially in our country, in universities, the students are like competing with grades, not like focusing on to learn skills. So they are just have a competition with grades to getting more marks. So what do you think, and what do you suggest about this thing to the students, the young
I really
generation?
hate this, actually. I really hate this. Of course, unfortunately, of course, grades are important because you're competing, and then fellowships and so on are often awarded based on grades. So yes, I mean, it's understandable that the students have that mindset. But I'm going to say something controversial, and actually, I said it here, even in our context here, with Western students, even, and I got in trouble for saying it. Personally, I prefer B students over A students.
Mm-hmm.
I tell you why. Because the A students usually they overstudy,
Mm-hmm.
and the B students they study enough to get the B, but they are also exploring other things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that other things make them probably more likely to be successful in the longer term than the ones who overstudy. And because the real world, once you're in working in the lab, once you're doing research, once you have to do all the other things that an academic has to do, or even if you work for a company, there are a lot of skills that are way beyond what just studying, right? You have to communicate with people, you have to have some kind of being streetwise in a way, try to read the situation and react quickly. You have to be able to deal with problems. You have to be able to deal with failure. A lot of really, really good students haven't really experienced failure. So what will happen when they experience failure? You have to be resilient. So all these other skills really, they come from that life experience. So this is why I personally like to see someone having more than just the academic background. Again, even someone with some evidence of artistry or
Yeah.
some evidence of really good kind of social media sort of presence. In these days we are using AlphaFold and these tools for protein structure modeling quite a lot. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, we noticed that a lot of students who are really good at computer games are
Yeah.
very good at analyzing protein structures on the
Yeah.
computer. So even a skill like being very good at computer games could actually in the future turn out to
Yeah.
be an incredibly important skill for application research. But
Yeah.
maybe the A students who are only studying and never really try to explore anything else, maybe they don't have the capacity to move out of their comfort zone to other areas of expertise, which will have to happen over a career. You're going to move out of your comfort zone.
So the next question is that for the first part, the what one piece advice to help the students to build a long-term professional relationship with the professors. Even though if they don't have like a research experience, especially in our countries, we don't have during bachelor or master, we don't have much experience about the research career, but they still want to go abroad for PhD or for their master degree. So how they can make a connection with them?
I mean, it's a difficult question again because of the volume, and as you alluded to earlier, there's just a lot of volume. But I would say if somebody were to email me a very specific question, I will do my best to respond to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think the problem is very often, you get emails like, would you like to co-supervise my master project? That's way too vague and way too general. And I obviously don't have the bandwidth to do that while also doing all the stuff I do here, right? But if somebody will ask me very specifically, I'm planning this experiment and I struggling between choice A and B, what would be your advice? I would probably take, the 5, 10 minutes to respond to that because that's very specific. And I would feel also that I could maybe have an impact on that is very tangible and very specific, right? So if you want to really build that relationship, be more specific.
Mm-hmm.
I think, unfortunately, a lot of the emails we receive are very generic.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're terrible because they're written by AI, full of errors. I mean, in
Yeah.
terms of like, somebody was telling me recently, a colleague of mine, that they received an email, I would like to join your lab and I really liked your paper. And the paper was actually fictional, AI produced kind of reference. It didn't exist, actually. That paper didn't even exist. So, yeah, if you're not even bothering to do that, then, yeah, obviously you're not going to go very far with that. But if you're very specific, somebody really shows to me in their message that they have thought about this, they have actually connected what they're doing with what I'm doing and what my knowledge is about, then I will probably take the time to support them. And that could be the first step in building a relationship.
Yeah. So, for from this question, is just not from the interview. Did you also get frustrated or irritated when you receiving like 50 emails and some is like saying from Chat GPT or something like this? How you like as a person, how you deal with that?
I always try to respond even politely and say, we receive high volume, I'm sorry, and this kind of things. Um, the times I get really irritated is not through email. I mean, if somebody sends a proper email with a good cover letter and with the CV attached, then I respect that and I will try to respond in one way or another. What irritates me is the messages that come through, for example, Facebook Messenger or other platforms like that. Sometimes it's just, hello, can we talk? Or hi, or I would like to join your lab. And I'm like, I mean, I have no information. There's no cover letter. There's nothing, I mean, what am I going to reply? Yeah, just hop over on the flight and come over. So that's not professional at all. And in some cases, I did actually shide people and say, look, this is not the way. I want to give you an advice. This is not how you should approach people. And you should really write a proper cover letter with your motivation, ambition, explain why you're interested in this particular lab, etc. Otherwise, it's not going to go far, right?
I think after this interview, you will get more message on Facebook from our country.
I hope not. Please.
So, okay, next for the second part, writing a strong research proposal for like for a fellowship when we are applying to like international fellowship, something like not is in your hand. It is totally based on sometime research proposal. So, what you makes a research idea truly good or worth experience? What is your advice to make a proposal writing?
I mean, many things, but I would start first with the big idea, the big picture. I think often the mistake that many people who write proposal at any stage, whether it's fellowship or an advanced
For
PI
grant writing.
proposal,
Mm-hmm.
is missing really the simple message behind that proposal. What's your 30-second pitch? I
Mm-hmm.
like to say, what's the 30-second pitch? Whatever your fellowship or your grant is about, if you happen to walk into an elevator and Bill Gates is there, and you have 3 or 4 floors to convince them to fund you. Maybe they ask you, what are you doing? Say, I'm a biologist. I work on plant disease or plant pathology. They say, okay, do you have an idea or do you have a project? And you have that 30 seconds to tell them about your project, what would that be about? And I think what's important about that is the narrative. There has to be a coherent narrative. For instance, you could say, I actually did my master's on microbiology, and I became an expert in microbiology. But then during my PhD, I started studying root-associated microbes. And now I combine these two knowledge of maybe sort of strong molecular microbiology with understanding the rhizosphere and the rhizobacteria. And now for my fellowship, I want to take this further and do something else, right? So that's a bit of a personal narrative that kind of connects the threads of your career in a narrative, not necessarily in a dry way, right? So again, if you want to convince someone, you have to tell them a story. So try to think about the story. Try to think about how this fellowship relates to your past and relates to your background, and what's the rationale behind the fellowship.
Okay, the student who is starting to prepare research proposals, we can like for example for your background. So do you think you like a innovative idea or you like the well structured idea in the research proposal?
I think it's very hard question to answer because it really depends on what program you're applying to, and some programs are more conservative than others. So it's very hard to give you a generic answer. However, what you really absolutely need is the what I like to call the Go rep. So
Hmm.
I don't know if you came across this, but this is in one of my blogs, and it's about how do you structure a research project. So Go rep stands for goal, hypothesis, rationale, and experimental plan. So that has to be incredibly clear in your mind. And sometimes, I mean, I often see proposals at any level, to be honest, that don't have a hypothesis.
Hmm.
For me, I mean, when I review a proposal, one of the first thing I do is I search for the word hypothesis in the document. And if I don't find it, I'm not going to be impressed by that proposal. There has to be a statement about what the hypothesis is. And the rationale also is very important, which can also be, again, the personal rationale, right? You could be because of your background, this has led you develop certain skills that allow you now to answer a new question, right? So it can be scientific rationale, but can also be strategic rationale, right? You have identified the connection with a lab that has complementary expertise,
Yeah.
and now you're going to bring something to that lab and build this new idea and new research. So, I mean, there are gradients of creativity and gradients of innovation. And again, that varies a lot. But what's more important is the coherence of the idea. And the coherence comes through having a very well-defined goal, a very well-defined hypothesis, a scientific rationale, a strategic rationale, even a personal rationale about you and your background and how that this extends that. And then, of course, a solid experimental plan.
Thank you very much for Thank you very much for this part. Now we can go for the third part. How to best way to start for reading scientific paper because us our student from bachelor or master, even we don't have much addiction to read a scientific paper. For I talk about myself when I went to China, so I started to read first time scientific paper there.
Mhm.
Before in my country I didn't read. So what is the best way to start to read the scientific paper? First abstract, conclusion, or what do you think?
So, first of all, you should be reading. Everybody should be reading. I mean, if you're an academic and a scholar, you have to read. That's the beginning of any way of capturing knowledge. I see behind you a beautiful library there, so I hope you read all those books. But we should all be reading all the time, right? So I would say I spend maybe half of my life reading, half
Okay, yeah.
of my sort of awake life, reading. I think we never read, we don't read enough. So the saying goes, one paper a day keeps the supervisor away. So all of you should be reading at least one paper a day. Now, how do you read? That's a very interesting point. I don't like this idea of having a protocol of you read the abstract, you read the figures, you read the results, whatever. The most important thing is that you read. And the most important thing is, and for instance, I mean, let me diverge a little bit here. For example, these days, there's a new kind of format, which is the Twitter thread.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually where I read most of the papers I read come through social media and reading this X or Twitter paper threads. When people publish papers, often now they write a summary and they have a thread of posts about it, social media
Mhm.
posts. I love reading those because they allow me to actually get exposed to papers outside my immediate field. And in those cases, I don't need to know more than what's in the paper thread. For instance, there is recently, maybe yesterday, there was a Twitter thread about a paper where in David Baker's lab in the US, they built synthetic on-off switches. And I read the thread, and it was interesting. It was based on, I think, interleukin receptors. I got a general idea of that, but I didn't go to read the full paper because that's the information I have now ingrained in my mind that these guys managed to do this. If one day I want to get more information about that, hopefully it will pop up in my memory and I will go and seek it, right? So I got the information that was sufficient for me for that kind of knowledge. But in other papers, of course, you want to go and get deeper. But what's most important about reading papers and about everything really you do is critical thinking. You have to develop critical thinking skills. So what's most important is actually to be able to analyze what you're reading, not just reading, but also analyze it. So for instance, can you detect whether an experiment is properly conducted or missing a control? Don't trust that because it's published in a journal is all good and everything. So that's something that you really need to engage in with your colleagues, maybe with people who have more expertise. If something you're not convinced about, go seek some expertise. Maybe go even read about the journals where they publish the reviews. I mean, now many journals publish reviews. There's a platform called Papier where people also publish reviews of published articles. So what's more important in parallel with reading is developing the capacity of critical thinking and making your own mind and your own opinion about the scientific literature because there's a lot of bad stuff out there.
Yeah. So for if the student is like in a new journey, so how they can dig into the proposal, like if you have a topic, how he can dig into that, like to start first to start reading review paper or just to focus on the research article.
A combination of both, but maybe what's maybe important is to connect with other students.
Mhm.
So, for example, do journal clubs to
Mhm.
develop critical thinking. Again, it's most important here is not again review article or research paper or even a Twitter post or whatever or preprints or so on.
Mhm.
What's important is your own critical thinking, your own critical mind. What do you make of the research that you're reading about? What is your own personal opinion? And the way to shape that is to build confidence about that is to connect with other scientists. So try to talk to other students, maybe your professors, ask them about particular paper, things that bother you, etc. So journal clubs, I mean, these days there's also these preprint review clubs that people do. Feel free to do that. So organize yourself among yourself. And I think, in my opinion, I think actually even the teaching should incorporate more of that these days, rather than just focusing on just pure sort of here's the knowledge. Is more like, okay, what do you think of this information? You can even ask ChatGPT to help you, or one of these LLMs to help you analyze some of this data and identify what is wrong with the published literature.
Thank you very much for this part. Now we can go for the third part. How to like best way to start for reading scientific paper because like us our student from bachelor or master even we don't have like much addiction to read a scientific paper. For I talk about myself when I went to China, so I started to read first time scientific paper there.
Mhm.
Before in my country I didn't read. So what is the best way to start to read the scientific paper? First abstract, conclusion, or what do you think?
So, first of all, you should be reading. Everybody should be reading. I mean, if you're an academic and a scholar, you have to read. That's the beginning of any way of capturing knowledge. I see behind you a beautiful library there, so I hope you read all those books. But we should all be reading all the time, right? So I would say I spend maybe half of my life reading, half
Okay.
of my sort of awake life, reading. I think we don't read enough. So the saying goes, one paper a day keeps the supervisor away. So all of you should be reading at least one paper a day. Now, how do you read? That's a very interesting point. I don't like this idea of having a protocol of you read the abstract, you read the figures, you read the results, whatever. The most important thing is that you read. And the most important thing is, and for instance, I mean, let me diverge a little bit here. For example, these days, there's a new kind of format, which is the Twitter thread.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually where I read most of the papers I read come through social media and reading these X or Twitter paper threads. When people publish papers, often now they write a summary and they have a thread of posts about it, social media
Mm-hmm.
posts. I love reading those because they allow me to actually get exposed to papers outside my immediate field. And in those cases, I don't need to know more than what's in the paper thread. For instance, there is recently, maybe yesterday, there was a Twitter thread about the paper where in David Baker's lab in the US, they built synthetic on-off switches. And I read the thread, and it was interesting. It was based on, I think, interleukin receptors. I got a general idea of that, but I didn't go to read the full paper because that's the information I have now ingrained in my mind that these guys managed to do this. If one day I want to get more information about that, hopefully it will pop up in my memory and I will go and seek it, right? So I got the information that was sufficient for me for that kind of knowledge. But in other papers, of course, you want to go and get deeper. But what's most important about reading papers and about everything really you do is critical thinking. You have to develop critical thinking skills. So what's most important is actually to be able to analyze what you're reading, not just reading, but also analyze it. So for instance, can you detect whether an experiment is properly conducted or missing a control? Don't trust that because it's published in a journal is all good and everything. So that's something that you really need to engage in with your colleagues, maybe with people who have more expertise. If something you're not convinced about, go seek some expertise. Maybe go even read about the journals where they publish the reviews. I mean, now many journals publish review. There's a platform called Papier where people also publish reviews of published articles. So what's more important in parallel with reading is developing the capacity of critical thinking and making your own mind and your own opinion about the scientific literature because there's a lot of bad stuff out there.
Yeah. So for if the student is like in a new journey, so how they can dig into the proposal, like if you have a topic, how he can dig into that, like to start first to start reading review paper or just to focus on the research article.
A combination of both, but maybe what's maybe important is to connect with other students.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, do journal clubs to
Mm-hmm.
develop critical thinking. Again, it's most important here is not again review article or research paper or even Twitter post or whatever or preprints or so on.
Mm-hmm.
What's important is your own critical thinking, your own critical mind. What do you make of the research that you're reading about? What is your own personal opinion? And the way to shape that is to build confidence about that is to connect with other scientists. So try to talk to other students, maybe your professors, ask them about particular paper, things that bother you, etc. So journal clubs, I mean, these days there's also these preprint review clubs that people do. Feel free to do that. So organize yourself among yourself. And I think, in my opinion, I think actually even the teaching should incorporate more of that these days, rather than just focusing on just pure sort of here's the knowledge. Is more like, okay, what do you think of this information? You can even ask ChatGPT to help you, or one of these LLMs to help you analyze some of this data and identify what is wrong with the published literature.
So next level when the student get into the PhD and he done the experiment and now he is the time to write a scientific article. So before he didn't write anything like how to write a scientific article. So what you suggest to start from this point when they are reaching on that?
Yeah, it's a good one. I have a workshop on this, so you're welcome to put a link to it. It's on
Yeah.
YouTube and on social media, so welcome to put a link to it under the video afterwards. But I mean, what I like to say, first of all, is writing paper is not about writing. And I think that's a big misconception. The
Mm-hmm.
writing is actually the simplest part, to be honest, in my view. And
Mm-hmm.
actually, these days, with the AI tools we have, it's even easier. So, writing a paper is about telling a story. So, you first have to have really good clarity in your mind about what the story is about, what you want to communicate to your audience, to your readers, what's the main message, what's the main finding, etc. So that's the main message really of my workshop, is to encourage the students to think about their paper first as a story and develop a storyline. And that storyline has to be coherent. There has to be two sentences that you have to focus on writing first. This is part of the workshop. The first sentence is, what's the main finding of the paper? And that's one finding, not two, not three, not four, just one. And that's sometimes difficult to do because very often when I do the workshop, I get a list of 3 or 4 findings, and that's not good. So, can you distill your paper into one finding? For example, this microbe, this bacteria enhances plant growth under these
Mm-hmm.
conditions, and not like it does this and does something else and does something else, right? So try to kind of distill your paper around one finding. If you do that, it's a lot easier to write the paper because it's all, kind of centering around this one message. The second thing is really the problem, the unknown that you're solving. I mean, every piece of literature, every piece of research um, output should be advancing our knowledge. That's really the point of writing papers. So, what was the problem you want to address, right? And you have to write that in one sentence. So once you have those two sentences written and you have your storyline, then the rest is really about filling the gaps, really, in a way. So, what
Yeah.
are your figure data? What are your results, etc. Right? But the first exercise is to think about that storyline and think about those two main points. And again, I encourage you to look at the workshop. You see more details
Yeah, I
about
will put.
the
I will.
ideas, but that's the main thing. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes also there is a tendency of telling the story in the historical way of how it happened. And that's not necessarily the best way of writing the paper. So you may have stumbled onto something during your PhD. You may have done those experiments. Maybe you isolate this bacteria because you thought it was doing something, and then you end up finding it enhances plant growth, which was not what you expected. So now you have to write the paper. You're not necessarily going to write it in the historical way you did it, but you have to write it in a story that is attractive, etc. So this is why a famous scientist, Peter Medawar, he's a British of Lebanese origin. He received the Nobel Prize back in the 50s. He wrote actually a very beautiful essay, said, titled "The Scientific Paper is a Fraud,"
Mm-hmm.
because we never tell we write the paper in the same way we did the research. We don't say, "Oh, we accidentally found this and then we did that," etc. Right? So we actually make up a little bit a story to make the communication exercise more interesting.
Yeah, so nowadays with the chat GPT, I think is easy for non-native speaker as well who just starting their journey. So, but when we are came on to the discussion, it is very difficult for the new student to write a discussion. So, what you can say about this step?
Yeah, discussion, very good. I have a whole section in the workshop about discussion.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually a really interesting one.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say the first thing about the discussion is that I love the discussion, and I think the discussion is also more personal because it's the least restricted part of a scientific research paper. You can actually say what you want. It's you have more freedom essentially to explore things in the discussion. You're not restricted by the data you have or by
Mm-hmm.
the introduction where you give the background information and knowledge. So it's more of a personal thing. So first of all, make it more personal. What are the topics that actually excite you about the research you did, and explore them in the discussion. The second part is that the discussion is also uh, important for basically telling people what the next steps will be, right? So the whole idea of research paper is that you had a problem, And you didn't solve the entire problem, that's never the case, but you contributed some piece of knowledge, a little stone that you can add to
Yeah.
our sort of pile of knowledge, right? But now that little stone really means that there's something else will follow it. So your discussion is actually your opportunity to tell the world what the next steps will be. And you don't want to miss that opportunity because you're the one who discovered uh, that research or produced that piece of knowledge. So why you should be the one who tells the readers, what the next steps will be. So this is where you can speculate also about what the next steps are, right? So that's another way of approaching the discussion. Another way, if you get stuck and you don't really know what to write, then ask a question. Start maybe the first sentence of that discussion paragraph is a question. Why does this bacteria enhance plant growth? And then spend the paragraph answering that question in whatever way you think is valuable. Yeah, again, I encourage you to look. There's more detail in the
Yeah,
workshop, but
sure. Just please
that gives
send
you
me the
some
link
ideas too.
of that workshop. I will add. There is very like a very useful suggestion from you. I also got it and learn. I will learn from it. And now